Jerry, welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Thanks for having me on, Ken. It's great to be here.
Yes, sir. We've been trying to have you on the show for a while, and I'm glad our schedules finally matched up. I'm a big fan of your book, Reboot.io. Before we get there, I know you had a whole career kind of before the coaching side and before becoming an author. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. How far back do we want to go?
Birth. Yeah. I'm okay with formative years, all the way into what you're doing now. If I remember right, you grew up in New York, right? Or at least lived here.
Yeah, I grew up in Brooklyn, and I joked, but it's actually relevant in the sense that I started off in my 20s as a technology journalist. And I worked for a technology magazine, a publishing company based out on Long Island. And because of that experience, I ended up becoming a venture capitalist. So one experience led directly into another. And I was a founding partner of a tiny firm called At Ventures just as I turned 30. And just before I turned 30. And then after about 2 years with that group, left and formed a new venture firm called Flatiron Partners with the guy who is quite well known now, Fred Wilson. And we spent from 1996 through 2001, 2002, building one of the first venture firms focused on internet-related activities. So back in the day when that was actually a separate category, it's like, that's how old I am. And that's how I really became a venture capitalist.
But when you were, I think it's interesting when you're doing, did you say you were like a tech writer, a tech reviewer?
I was a reporter.
And
then I became editor of the magazine. So I had a kind of stellar rise within the magazine itself.
I'm sorry. You're talking about, what magazine was that again? I'm sorry.
Information Week.
Information Week. Yeah, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. I do remember that from your bio. So, and so you're just getting introduced. You're in that world all the time. That leads to you becoming an investor in that world, that you have success with that. It continues to build. Early 2000s, though, you find yourself, because that story sounds pretty good. I mean, from the outside looking in, right? Rapid rise, probably doing great financially, but not doing so great spiritually,
emotionally.
Yeah. So when did that all come to a head?
Well, if you look at it from a chronological perspective, it was sort of beginning in 1999 into 2000, 2001. And there were a lot of external events that sort of colluded with some things going on internally for me, which I'm happy to discuss, that resulted in a return of a depression. So if you go back to 1999, there was this like massive bubble going on. The market was, it's funny because it feels familiar. The market was hyperinflated. Valuations were through the roof. Everything that we seemed to touch seemed to turn to gold. And then starting in around March 2000, the air started coming out of the bubble. And fast forward into 2001, and very, very quickly, everything we touched seemed to turn to crap. And then 9/11 hits. And it would be too simplistic to say that the depression that followed, and I'll talk about that in a second, the depression that followed wasn't rooted necessarily in the challenges that I was experiencing professionally. Flatiron, our firm, Fred and I, our partnership was great. It was fine. I mean, we went from having super high valued companies to not so great. but that was fine. 9/11 was a major hit emotionally. It felt like it was, it set off a profound sense of anxiety for me. And I was sleepless for months. I tell the story in Reboot that I was on the last flight out of New York down to DC that morning. And I was in DC sitting next to then Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle when the attacks started to happen. And it felt personally deeply challenging. And it would be insufficient if I said that was the root of the depression that followed. Because the reality was I had a very long lifetime relationship with depression going back to my childhood. And in one way, being marked when I was 18 by a suicide attempt that thankfully failed, but did land me in the hospital and did set me on a course of therapy that was very helpful. By the time I was 38, which is in 2002, 2003, what was happening was that the life that I had constructed for myself in my 20s and my 30s was outwardly compelling, but out of alignment with my true sense of self. And so, in some ways it could be marked as an existential period of midlife reexamination. I've always been precocious, so it was early, but really it was a combination of things where, as I often described, I felt like I was wearing an ill-fitting suit that just wasn't mine.
How did 9/11 contribute to that? I mean, the sense of unease that you talked about, was it unease for your safety? Was it a mankind just isn't good? Like what? I mean, like what was the?
It was more around the lack of safety than really a negation of humankind, because it was, the post-attack days were very interesting in a way, because I threw myself into two different activities, both of which were built around, in effect, rebuilding the city. One was an effort led by the Partnership for the City of New York, which was an attempt to raise money to provide non-recoverable grants to small businesses impacted by the Trade Center attacks. Barbershops and dry cleaners and pet shops, all these businesses we really weren't paying attention to. They were all in the frozen zone, which some may recall lasted for months. And even though they were technically safe from the debris or from the toxic dust that was in the air, they had no customers. They were completely shut down. And so that, throwing myself into that effort, and then I threw myself into another effort, which was the NYC 2012 Olympic bid effort. We were trying to get the 2012 Summer Games to New York City. And in hindsight, I think what was happening, and I got very frantic with both of those things. And I think what I was trying to do was rebuild what felt like my city. My city was attacked. My home was attacked. And as is often the case for me, I reach for the thing that I do well in order to lean into a difficult time. And I officially started working for JP Morgan. And it was the outside was doing okay, but the inside was not good.
Well, it sounds like 9/11 was like you said, the depression had been there,
Mm-hmm.
lifelong, or at least since
Mm-hmm.
adolescence. You can identify some points in 1999 where there's
Mm-hmm.
definitely some stuff. Now it's 2002, and we're similar in age because I remember I was 36 at the time, and I also went through something similar. Actually, I'll touch on it in a second, but it sounds like it was a buildup, and then 9/11 was kind of a trigger, right? That
Mm-hmm.
whatever momentum your depression had, it maybe gave it a nice push in the back, right? Some tailwind. Was there a Obviously 9/11 is a huge catalyst, but was there another moment that where you went, this is it, or you had to make a decision whether you wanted to be here or not? Was it like,
Oh,
where did
sure.
that lead you?
Sure. So following the attacks, there was a lot of activity in New York, and I was starting a new job at JP Morgan during the same time, but I was starting a job with people that I had been in partnership with already because of the previous relationship between JP Morgan and Flatiron. And then in February 2002, February 2nd, 2002, I went to a meeting at the NYC 2012 committee, and we were located in an office building that was right near Ground Zero, and we were there because nobody wanted to be down there, and so we had free
Cheap
office
rent, yeah,
space, cheap
yeah,
rent, exactly. And I remember leaving and passing Ground Zero and feeling so overwhelmed by just the pain and suffering. It was almost like I stepped into this cloud of ghosts and this, I mean, we have to remember that the pile, as they called it, was still smoldering.
yeah.
And, firefighters and rescue workers and steel workers were coming in and out, and God knows what they were breathing in at the time. And it was this visceral reminder of suffering.
Right.
And there was that moment at that time where forgive me, I'm about to curse. I was just, fuck it.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
done. And I went down to the subway platform on the Wall Street station, and I was going to leap. And I pulled myself back from the edge of the platform, and the train rushed by. And there was this like voice in my head that said, "What are you doing? What are you doing? You have 3 kids." And I staggered upstairs and I called my therapist, whom I had been seeing for a number of years at that point. And she said, "Get in a cab, come out and see me," because her office was in Great Neck, Long Island. And I did just that. And I just walked into her office and I just burst into tears. And I said, "I can't do it anymore. I can't live." And from that moment, I mean, she ended up sending me to Canyon Ranch to do kind of like 2 weeks of recovery work. And it was from that moment that I really, my whole life changed forever. And so whatever human that people respond to now and
Totally
find,
different.
it all began in that moment.
What was the first step of, I guess you said you went to rehab. Was it psychological rehab? Was it substance rehab? Like what kind of
No, there was no
place were you?
substance involved. People often think like, oh, you hit rock bottom, were you alcoholic? No, there was no
Yeah,
substance.
yeah, yeah. So
It
it was
was,
just a facility.
yeah, Canyon Ranch is like, a very twee, bougie, luxury resort.
Yeah.
And when I got there, I mean, there were a couple of things happened. I was on the flight down there and I read 3 books: When Things Fall Apart by Pema Chodron, Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer, and Faith by Sharon Salzberg. And I will say I knew none of those people when I read their books. And today I count all 3 as dear and close friends.
That's
So
amazing. So those
I
books
am a
just
very
find their
lucky man.
way into your life, and you had these mentors
That's
from
right.
afar that helped you. That's
That's
really
right.
cool.
That's right. And I went down there, and one of the first things I did was sign up for a meditation course. And it was in that course, that couple of days of meditation, that was just like, what am I doing with my life? And it
Because it was
was,
so good.
well, the meditation just forced me just to ask that question of myself.
Right.
I mean, I'll say this, I didn't like the answers that were coming up,
Right. Right.
right? I didn't like the way I was living, which was out of alignment with who I really am.
When I obviously didn't know you then, I'm just getting to know you now. If the picture you're painting, and just tell me if I have it right. So you're a New York guy, you're an investment banker, you know, you're a venture capitalist guy. Like,
Master of the universe.
yeah, I'm going to get the Olympics here to New York because, God damn it, you're not going to hurt our city and all of that.
That's right.
Was it just the stereotypical, like, foot on the gas at all times, never take it off kind of? Was that the,
I think that I would describe myself that way, but I think friends like Fred, who knew me well at that time, would say you weren't like that.
right.
But it
You
felt
felt that way. Yeah.
I felt that way. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So
That's right.
when so you read these books and you go and you start getting some help, and what does that look like when you start rebuilding things? I guess what was the first changes you decided to make in terms of you're like, I'm doing nothing like the old, I'm doing everything like the new. So I guess maybe the first thing might have been like, what has to go? So for you, what was that as
Well,
you started rebuilding yourself?
yeah, the first thing I did was when I got back, a couple of weeks after I got back, was the spring of 2002. And I went into my then boss's office, Jeff Walker, who remains a very, very close friend now, who was vice chairman of the bank and head of our group, our private equity investing group. And I said, at some point in the following months, I said, I'm not going to renew my contract. I'm not going to stay. And he was shocked because they had just recruited me. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do with my life, but I can't keep going doing what I'm doing. And fortunately, I had the great privilege of being able to make a statement like that. I had accumulated enough that I could be safe to make that statement. And I then entered a period of about 2 or 3 years where I was busy, but I wasn't, quote, doing much. I wasn't like building, and, you know, I didn't have an official title. I didn't have an official income. I had, you know, I was cobbling together some consulting fees, and I was doing various things. I had 27 board seats, which was insane.
Wow.
But I mostly spent the time working on myself. I mean, I started going to therapy 3 times a week. I did dance therapy. I did art therapy. I, would take workshops. I was reading books that I never thought I would read. I was just doing whatever I could to alleviate my own pain.
I can't resist. I heard you and Tim Ferris talking on an old podcast, and somehow, What About Bob? That movie made it in there. I don't know if you remember that, but you were just talking about all the different therapies. And I was thinking of What About Bob? Death therapy. Remember that when he wrapped him with dynamite? He's gonna blow him up.
Amen.
So, and what was the stuff that you learned from that? So now we're talking probably from 2002 to 2005. What did you, give or take, right? What did you learn in that time frame?
Learned a lot. I learned that I was running away from some core issues inside of me, and that the further I ran away, the more they hurt, which, by the way, is the second noble truth of Buddhism. I learned to sit still, to be somewhat esoteric about it, meaning not only did I physically learn how to meditate, but I learned how to deal with the thoughts that arise when you actually sit still and meditate, which, by the way, it's not fun. I learned that there was a profound disconnect between who I wanted to be and who I really was. And I learned to start asking myself a whole bunch of questions, which then led into becoming a coach,
Yeah, I
which I
mean,
started training in 2005, 2006.
what's really cool, and I wasn't even trying to set it up that way, was I had some notes from your book, which I love. His book is called Reboot.io, and
Well,
those.
reboot.io is the website. So
Oh, I'm sorry, just Reboot is like a
reboot
book.
leadership and the art of
Yeah,
growing up. There we go.
but the points that you just made out of that time frame that you learned, those are the first chapters of the book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Radical self-awareness, the way we deal with crisis defines us, learning to stand still. Truth is always your friend. So getting clear on that. I thought it was really interesting in the book when you talked about how unresolved trauma will continue. I mean, it's unresolved, right? So it needs to be resolved, or it stays unresolved, and it's going to rear its head no matter how successful we think we are or what we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you a metaphor that helps explain that even further. And this comes from an autobiography I read. There's a section in the autobiography where the writer is telling the story about how he, after 25 years of psychoanalysis, he came to realize that we all have what he termed unsorted baggage, stuff that we just have not dealt with. And that there comes a moment in time where you have to do the sorting. Because if not, you're going to pay a price, and the price will be in tears. Well, that image stuck with me. And the writer is Bruce Springsteen.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, exactly. Because what we do and what I did, and I grew up where listening to Born to Run was like my anthem, right? This notion of I got to get out of here before they kill me. When I read that section of the autobiography, I was blown away, because here was a man upon whom I projected so much strength, so much coolness, right? So much of what I had defined I wanted to be. And him sitting there saying, just like me,
Right.
a lifetime of struggle with depression and anxiety. And that image of the unsorted baggage stays with me to this day. The basic message of Reboot is that, you have a choice. We all have a choice. You either deal with the shit or you know.
Right.
But what you don't have a choice is the implication if you don't deal with it.
Yeah. I mean, you'll be dealing with it, right? At some point.
That's right.
You either
That's
get
right.
to be proactive in the way that comes into your life, or it can hit you like a ton of shit out of nowhere, like it kind of did for you on the train platform in 2002.
Exactly. A really powerful book on this is by Terry Real, who's a brilliant writer, who wrote a book called I Just Don't Want to Talk About It, which is about men's struggle to talking about depression. And
I couldn't. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
and there's an epidemic of the fact that not just the depression, but the inability to work with those feelings, to work with the challenges of it. And the result is toxic behavior. The result is, a kind of slow suicidal tendency where, we'll drink ourselves to death, or we'll work ourselves to death, or we'll destroy our lives in that process.
I found it impossible to deal with emotions. I just couldn't do it. It just wasn't in my wheelhouse for like the longest time. And you would do just enough to fake it, right? To make it seem like you weren't dead inside, but like, nothing real was happening there. And I had around the same time as you, and also probably triggered by the stock market
Mm,
and the things around it. I had wrapped my personal identity, I think, because of some childhood circumstances, was I had a real scarcity mindset when it
mm,
came to everything, but I'll use money because it's easily
mm,
that was kind of the thing I thought I needed when I was young. I needed, if I had money, if I would have grown up with money, things would be better.
mhm.
So worked my ass off to do that and did that. So in my early 20s, did well like you did. And um, as you stated, everybody in 1998 was a stock picking genius. You know what I mean? But the problem
Right.
with me is I was dumb enough to think that was actually true. And I
Right.
kept doubling down and doing things on margin. And I sold a company and made some money on that. And
Yeah.
until I didn't, right? If you're
Mhm,
marginalized when a market goes down, you're screwed. And I
mm,
was. And you mentioned, and it was funny because your identity to money was different. You said,
mm,
"Well, we had some companies that went up, and they went down,
mm,
and that's okay. We didn't like it. We'd rather they go up." But I can
mm,
tell you had no emotional attachment to that. To me, it was shame. To me, it was because I had built everything I was around that. That to me was the definition. If I could make that happen, then
mm,
I could outrun. You talk
mm,
about outrunning your past and that you can't. To me, that was a way I outrun it. I outrun my past by not being like these assholes. And I'm not calling my
mm.
family assholes. That's just what was going on in my head at the time.
You can call them assholes.
Okay, maybe a little bit. but but then it blows up on you. And again, you haven't
Right.
sorted through the baggage. And so
Right.
all the baggage is there. The money, which you think is keeping you solvent
Safe.
or safe,
Right.
is emotionally safe. Yeah, that's not there now either. So what do I do with myself? And
Right.
kids, it was funny when you said, "What am I doing?" I have 3 kids. And that's probably the only thing that stopped me from going a little further down that path was a little bit of leverage, right? I can't. And so I was then in no man's land for a while of, I don't know how to talk about my feelings. I don't know how to sort my baggage. I'm not going to
Mhm,
kill myself. And I do kind of feel like I'm a piece of shit and I'm full of shame and all this stuff, right? So what do I do now? And I sat in that for a while I rebuilt my career and my finances.
mm,
Um, but yeah, it was so when I heard you go through that at the time you went through it, and obviously we came from different circumstances, but still some similar things in those
mm,
background triggering some, I think, key life revelations.
mm. So a couple of things. Just to clarify, well, first of all, thank you for sharing all that. And I see
Yeah,
why Reboot resonates with you. Um, a couple of quick things. The first is that, to be clear, I had a complicated relationship with money, but I could be sanguine about certain aspects of investing because you have to be to survive it as a venture investor. But I still felt shame every time one of the companies would fail. Even if we didn't lose that much money, I still felt the shame. But more important for me, the compulsion was to accumulate not a forever amount, although that was one of the first thoughts I used to have. And by forever amount, I often use the Bill Gates as a model, right? The Bill Gates amount of money. But I got quite attached to the notion of having just enough so that I could feel safe. That's the word that always resonated with me. Um, so 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 that was a huge motivator for me. And while I didn't experience what you experienced in terms of the loss of a fortune or a loss of enough money, um, I did have my own shame roller coaster ride.
sure.
But I want to say one other thing about your resonance with my story. And this I did not write about. And I've talked a little bit about since so Reboot was released in June of 2019. I have a new book coming out in November, this coming November. And I write about this phenomena in the new book. I cannot describe accurately to you the number of people from a diverse set of backgrounds who, in reading Reboot, have come up to me in one form or another and said the phrase, "Your story is my story."
Mm-hmm.
It's extraordinary to me. It was totally unexpected. I've said this before on podcasts. A few months ago, on the exact same day, I received notes from a man on death row and the CEO of a Fortune 100 company, both of whom read Reboot and said, "Your story is my story."
So interesting how connected we all really are, isn't it?
That's the point. That's the point. Isn't it interesting? Because when we're in the middle of these struggles, we think it's only happening to us, right? Back in 1999, 1998, 1999, part of the shameful patterning that you were going through, I'll bet, was, what an idiot I am. I'm the only one who does this.
Yeah, totally.
And it's just not true.
I think
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's like, we all get those life stories or conditions or negative beliefs or whatever they are, and wherever they come from our environment, from our parents, from ourselves, from whoever, and then we just play that record 1,000 times over again, 100,000 times over again. And even if we intellectually go, "That's bullshit, I don't like that fucking record, I'm going to go change it. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that record gets fucking scratched up and torn up." And you do it until you don't anymore. And then it's just this avalanche of, I think, self-doubt and of the, it's almost like the universe just said, "I told you so." The universe said, all those limiting beliefs, you're not worth it. You're not cut out to make this kind of money, whatever it is like, oh shit, what was I doing thinking I was something other than this? Right.
Who
I
am I
think
to think
that's
I
what
could
people,
escape?
Yeah. And I think that's what people can relate to, right? No matter what. And when you were talking earlier about making enough money to feel safe, what I was thinking of as I was listening to you was, boy, that's a tricky word, isn't it? Like, because that Fortune 100's version of safe and the guy on death row version of safe when it comes to money are two entirely different things. And there's billionaires that are living in scarcity every day, and there's guys with $50 to their name that feel fine as long as they know that they've got a place to sleep tonight. So yeah, it's all in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, and what we don't necessarily do is question belief systems. We don't necessarily question what does it mean to be safe. And you asked before, in effect, about my journey, my recovery process, if you will. One of the things that meditation gave me was the skill to step outside the experience of my body and my mind and to step into, what the heck am I thinking? Right. And so I remember being able to look at my anxiety rather than experience my anxiety. And that simple noticing gave me the capacity to call it into question. Right. Why do I feel unsafe when my prefrontal cortex knows that I'm safe?
Right.
Right. What is going on in my own mind that there's this conflict that's happening? And then the really powerful question, Ken, is when I began saying, how does it serve me? How does it benefit me to believe that I'm not safe? Oh, I use that to drive any success that I had. I use that to escape the conditions of my childhood. That's the gift of that false belief.
Right.
And that's a crazy jujitsu move, when we're able to look at the constructs of our own belief systems, our own limiting beliefs, or in my book, I call them subroutines, programming code laid down at the very creation. When we start to look at those with that generous, compassionate eye, how has it served me? Why is it beneficial for me to think I'm not worthy? All of a sudden, we start to transform that belief system and we go, wait, I don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Because I'm already safe.
Yes. And you have that chapter in your book where you talk about embrace your personal crow and your loyal soldier, right? And that's the part that I think you're talking about here. And what it was reminding me of is, or not reminding me of, or making me think of, was this idea that if the voice that we have that sometimes doubts ourselves, right, is the same voice that, in a way, there's a benefit to it. It's trying to keep us safe. We're not in fight or flight anymore in terms of running from dinosaurs. So it's saying, like, don't put something on Facebook. Someone might not like it or whatever, right? So now we, trivial things for this fight or flight. And I think, like, traditional logic, or at least with myself, has been like, well, no, don't be that. Like, fight that. Screw that. I don't want to be that. Don't listen to that. And that's a fight. That's a rub. That's a conflict. And I think what I got from what you were saying, at least my interpretation of it, was, well, can you dance with that? Because there's some, instead of fighting with it, can you dance with it? Because there's some benefit in these so-called negative emotions or limiting beliefs or whatever. And if you can at least ask, like, well, what does this mean? Right? Okay. Yeah. Hey, thanks, voice in my head. You've done a pretty good job protecting me in certain ways. I will listen to you and consider your opinion. You don't get to run the show, but you can be an opinion in the show, right?
Yeah. I would actually go one step further. Beyond dancing, I talk about loving that part of you. Okay. Loving the crow. Because, and the crow is a symbol for that inner critic voice that says to you, don't do this thing, don't do this thing. Because what is that voice trying to do? It's trying to protect you from existential humiliation. It's trying to protect you from shame. It actually has your best intentions for you. It has your best interest at heart. It just doesn't feel like that. Right. It's like a parent who tells you, don't cross the street. It's really dangerous over there. Or don't leave town. There, it's trying to hold you back because it loves you. Right. The problem is that it misunderstands the world. It sees the world as this awful, dangerous place. And when you step into your full adult self, you get to embrace that crow. You get to embrace that and say, I really appreciate you keeping me safe, Mom, Dad. But I'm good. Right. I can cross the street. I can go to college. I can leave town. I can try this new job. I can even fail and I'll be okay. Right. Which is mind-blowing if you truly allow yourself to internalize that. Right. But there has to be that pause that you were talking about earlier that you gain from meditation. That's right. Yeah. I never used to operate in a way where everything was reactive, and everything was go. Yeah. Yep. Right. Yep. But you're right. If you pause, the first thing you're going to hear is things that you don't want to hear. Right. But the second thing and the third thing and the fourth thing are the things that you need to hear. Right. No, that's cool. That's a really cool way of putting it. Well, listen, you've been so great with your time. You said your new book comes out this fall? Yeah, November 14th. Pre-orders are open now, but the book is called Reunion, Leadership, and the Longing to Belong. And it's really a question of what is a leader's responsibility in a world where there's so much division and strife and separation?
Oh man,
What
it
can
sounds
we
awesome.
do? Yeah. It was a powerful book to write, and I'm quite proud of it. So I'm excited.
I'll read it right when it comes out, and I'd love to reach out and see if we can get you back on to chat about that after it's out.
You got it. I'll be here.
All right, sir. Thanks so much for your time. Lovely to meet you.
You too, and thanks for having me on the show.
All right, take care. Thanks so
Take
much.
care.